I'm planning to teach all of the rules of chess in a single stream. That's what I'm going to try to do. I hope I do a good job. And if I don't do this as well as I like, hey, then I can do it, try again in the next stream. That's what I'm going to do. So here's what I'm going to do now. Just going to refresh the page and have a fresh start here. Okay, so here we have the chessboard. This is the chessboard. Welcome to Chastity's introduction to the game of chess. So this is a chessboard you see. And you will see that there are 6 different types of pieces here. I'm going to go over each piece and what it's called. And notice that we have a checkerboard pattern because the checkerboard, chessboard is the same pattern. But you have the white pieces and the black pieces here. That is how you know which pieces belong to which player, because chess is a 2-player board game, but you can also play it on the computer on livechess.org. I highly recommend it. So anyway, here we have the chessboard, and let me go over the different pieces. See, when I click on pieces, it highlights them. So look at these pawns. These are pawns. These things, there's 8 of these things. Those are called pawns. Now, pawns are a very special piece. I'm going to begin with the pawns and explain what pawns do. Pawns move forward, and on their very first turn, they can move 1 or 2 squares. So this pawn can move 2 squares, and so can this pawn over here, for instance. So, but then afterwards, they can only move 1 square forward. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at this. This pawn here, it moves 1 space. But now look at this. This pawn has the option to move forward, or it can capture this, because pawns are ridiculous because they capture 1 square forward diagonally. So instead of moving 1 square forward, this pawn has the option to capture this pawn right here. So that's crazy, but then this pawn can capture that pawn. So far I'm only moving pawns, and that's the thing, is pawns, they move only straight forward, but then they capture diagonally. And that's what's really insane about pawns, is their capture rules are different than their normal movement rules. Now, fortunately, they are the only piece where that's true. So once you know how to use pawns, then you're set with pawns, because all of the other pieces are easier to understand than the pawns. Now, there is one more rule about pawns that you have to know before I move on to discussing the other pieces. Let's just restart here. Now, pawns have something a little bit strange going on here. There's something a little bit strange about pawns. So let's say we have a pawn there, we have a pawn there, and we have a pawn here. Now, this rule, it's called en passant. It means in passing. It means in passing in French is what it means. Now look at this. If this pawn decides to move 2 squares forward, the white pawn has the option of capturing it as if it had moved only 1. Basically, the pawn captures the other pawn in passing. So while the pawn was traveling through that square, while it was passing through, then the other pawn could capture it. And that's it. Guys, that's all there is to know about pawns, that they move. And remember, they only move 2 squares on their very first turn. After that, they only are able to move just 1 square forward. But that's it. That's everything you need to know about pawns already. Already, I've explained everything about pawns. And there are 8 pawns. Oh, I did forget one important thing. If you get any of your pawns to the edge of the board, they can become a queen or another piece. They can promote and evolve into another piece. So think Pokemon and evolution. Think of it like that. In fact, I'm going to be making a lot of Pokemon references just because it's so accurate for chess. Anyway, so what now that I've explained the pawns, I'm going to move on to my very next favorite piece, the knight. Now, all of these other pieces, I'm going to explain each of them, but there is one piece that's special, the knight. Besides the pawn, which are in the front, the pawns are in the front and they can always move at the start of the game. The only other piece that can move at the very start of the game is the knight. And that's because knights have a very interesting pattern here of jumping. They jump in an L shape. So look at this. You see how this knight is? It moves in an L block. It basically, the knight moves in a Tetris shape. If you've ever seen the L block, how it's made up of 4 squares in Tetris, then you know how the knight moves. Basically, 2 squares one direction and one another. So this knight, for example, can move here, and this knight can move here, 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 here. And that's just it. They move in a very specific L shape. And that's what makes them unique, in that they don't move in any way that makes sense normally, but they move in an L shape, like an L Tetris block. That's how they move. And you might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, the point of it is that knights are actually extremely tricky. And let me show you a good example. I can show you an example of why knights are really tricky. So look at this. I move the knight, and let's have black just decide to move a pawn. And then white moves these knights here. Yeah, I'm just going to show you a really funny example. So I'm just having black make a stupid move. Actually, let me back up. Let me just restart there. I'm going to show you how it's possible to checkmate. Well, not checkmate technically, but how it's possible to destroy your opponent using only knights. This only works if you're against a player who doesn't know what they're doing. So bear that in mind. So look at this. The knights are moving out. Yeah, okay. And suppose this happens, just whatever move. Now look at this. You see the situation, we have these 2 knights. And remember, both of these knights can move to this square right here. Well, if this happens, if this knight moves here, look at that. This knight attacks the king. And there's only one reason it's not checkmate, and that's because the queen can capture it. But then the knight captures it, and then the king has to move out of the way, and then the knight captures the rook. That's just an example of why knights are dangerous. It's not always going to go that easy for you, but I started with the pawns because they're an important starting piece, and then I went with the knights. You're going to find out the more chess you play, the more valuable knights will become to you. I can promise you that. Knights are just a very powerful piece, and they're hard for people to see their attack patterns sometimes, and that's what makes it interesting. So anyway, I'm going to go on to the next piece that I want to talk about, the movement rules. The next piece I want to talk about is the bishop. Now, in order for a bishop to move, the pawns have to get out of their way. So let's move these pawns here all into the center. Now look at this. Bishops move diagonally, only diagonally. That's the thing about bishops, is they move, but only diagonally. And in this case, the bishop is attacking the king because the king is in check, meaning the bishop could move on to that space where the king is next turn. But in the game of chess, if the king can't escape the attack, it's called checkmate, and then they lose the game. So that's how you win, is you checkmate your opponent. And in this case, it's not checkmate because this bishop can come here and block. And then when the bishop captures, then either the king or the queen can capture this bishop. So now you know bishops move diagonally. You know that the knight moves in a Tetris shape, the L block. And you know the pawns, how they move, because I explained that earlier. Let's move on to the very next piece. The next piece, which is a little bit different than the bishop, is the rook. Let's start by getting these rooks out of here. See, I'm moving them just so that we can get them closer to the center of the board here. So look at this. What you see here is that the rook moves orthogonally, meaning not diagonally, whereas the bishop moves diagonally, the rook moves orthogonally, meaning they can move vertically or horizontally until they hit something. Now you can't capture your own pieces, but you can capture your opponent's pieces. That's kind of the point of the rooks. And so rooks can go to any square on the board, whereas bishops are stuck on the same color square they started on. Now, this rook here can capture this rook. Now, keep in mind, rooks are extremely powerful and they're commonly used for checkmating. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, the reason, obviously, I started with the pawn and the knights because those are starting pieces. You start the game using those. But the reason I explained the bishop and the rook next is because that leads into the queen. The queen is actually considered the most powerful piece in the game of chess. The queen is extremely powerful, and let me give you an example of why the queen is so powerful. So what we're going to do here, let's move these pawns out of the way so the queens can get into the action here. Now, if you look at this, the queen moves diagonally to start with, but afterwards, the queen has some serious options. The queen can move as a combined rook or bishop. So to give you a more clear example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate some pieces here. I'm going to eliminate some pieces here just to clear the way a little bit. So what I'm going to do here, so now what you'll see is the queen has the option to move in all 8 directions. So you see the queen here, it can move as if it were a bishop because it can move on all diagonals, but it also moves as if it was a rook. It can move orthogonally as well. Keep in mind it can't move past here because this white pawn is right in the way. So let's move this pawn out of the way just a little bit. And then we'll just get this out of the way. I'm just trying to clear space on the board, if you know what I mean. So now you see that the queen has full range of motion. The only move that the queen can't do is what a knight can do. It can't move in an L shape. So it can't go here, 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 for example. Only the knight can do that. So the queen is the most powerful piece because it has the powers of a rook and bishop combined. And that's why when players lose their queen in a game, they often resign. For that very reason, the queen is powerful. So think about it. I've already talked about the pawns. Oh, and I do want to show you one other thing, very, very important thing. Look at this. When the pawn gets to the other side, you can choose which piece it becomes. So it can become another queen. That's just an example there for you. You know, so now a player can have more than one queen. Pawns can become queens and they can also become the other pieces. So what have we not covered? There's only one piece that we haven't actually talked about, except that I've moved it, and that is the king. The king here, let me show you, the king is very special. Let me just restart the entire board. The king is actually very special because what we can do is let's bring the king out. I'm just going to bring the king out by getting it out here. Okay. So now notice this king, it can move one square in any of the 8 directions, but the king has a special rule. It can't move onto a square where it's being, where it would be attacked. So the king can move like the queen, except only one square in any direction. So any square that's touching where the king currently is, it can move to. But if you look at this, let me show a better example. So if you look at this, this pawn, if this pawn moves right here, then look, the king can't move to this spot because that pawn is guarding it. So you could say the king is the weakest. The king is the weakest piece because if you lose your king, you basically die. You lose the game because the game is about defending your king and going after the enemy king. That's what it's about. So I'll show you a very quick example of a checkmate. Let me show you the fastest checkmate ever known in the world. The fastest checkmate. Look at this, guys. White moves this pawn. Then black moves this pawn. White moves this pawn. And then watch this. Checkmate. Notice it calls it Barnes opening / fool's mate. White has played a very poor and weakening move and allowed black the quickest possible checkmate. See, I told you it was the quickest. Fool's mate in the opening game of chess. Mate in 2 moves. The mate almost never occurs in practice, but is commonly known among chess players due to it being the fastest possible checkmate. However, black was already better. So here's the thing. This is checkmate. This is how black won the game because white made the mistake of moving these pawns out of the way. If there were still pawns here, white could defend. Or if it had moved on one of these other pawns, the king could move out of the way. But this is the fool's mate. And that's how you win or lose the game. So what have I not covered? I've talked about the pawns, the knight, the bishop, the rook, the queen, and the king. There is only one more important rule in chess that's important to know, and that's castling. Castling is a little bit of a weird rule, just like en passant is a little bit weird of a rule for pawns. But castling is actually it's actually not that complicated. Let me show you an example of kingside castling. Now, in order for this to happen, you have to get the knight and the bishop out of the way. Now look at this. When there are no pieces between a king and a rook, if there's no pieces there, the king can actually move 2 squares. This is the only time in the game of chess where a king can move 2 squares in one turn. But here's an example. Kingside castle. And notice that the rook goes on the square that the king skipped when it moved. It skipped that square, but then the rook ended up going there. That's how castling works. And so now black can do the same. That's called a kingside castle because it occurs on the side of the board, the right side of the board where the king already was down on that side. But a queenside castle is also possible. Let's see how a queenside castle would look. So first we have to start by getting these pieces out of here. So yeah, let's get these pieces out of here. Now there's also the queens that are in the way here. We need to get the queens out of the way as well. Now we're going to see a queenside castle. Like like before, the king can move 2 squares towards the rook. And then the rook goes onto the square that the king skipped. That's a queenside castle. It's easy to forget if you're a new chess player about castling, and trust me, it's not the most important thing until you get to be an intermediate and advanced and you're playing, chess with people who know what they're doing. A lot of times the game will end before anybody has a chance to castle. And also keep in mind that you can only castle if your king and that specific rook have never moved in the game that you're playing so far. That's it, guys. That is all the rules of chess. I covered the movement rules and capture of the pawn, the knight, the bishop, the knight, the queen, and the king. And I even showed the fool's mate, the quickest checkmate. I covered, guys, seriously, I just covered all of the rules of the game of chess already. And I've only been streaming for about half an hour. So, that's it. That's all the rules of chess in half an hour. That's not hard. And it could be explained in less time if somebody was less autistic than I am and rambled less. But I can explain it that quickly. Now, there is one other thing that you should be aware of, because I showed you the fool's mate. The fool's mate is what I showed you, the 2-move checkmate. I also want to show you the scholar's mate. The scholar's mate is what I'm going to show you next. The scholar's mate occurs when both sides move their king's pawn 2 squares forward, and then they move their bishops out. And then here we have queen out. And let's just say, for the sake of example, queen moved here. Now, this wouldn't happen in an actual game, but here's the thing. Actually, that's not what usually happens. What usually happens here is that somebody does something else. They move a different piece. And then white comes here. It's checkmate. You see that? It's checkmate because black is checkmated by scholar's mate. The scholar's mate is what it's called when you move out your king's pawn, you quickly bring out your bishop and your queen diagonally, and you attack the weak f7 square. Why is this called the f7 square? Well, let's take a look. I do need to cover chess notation just a little bit. Look at this. You see these letters down at the bottom here? They're hard to read while you're on the video, I'm sure. But if you're playing on most chess websites, you will be able to see the letters and the numbers. You read them like a map. So, for example, this pawn that I've just clicked is on D2, and here it moves to D4. And this pawn that is on F7, here it's moving to F5. Just think of the like you read a map, how there's a letter and a number. It's a key. The letters are the vertical, which column here and which row you're on. The horizontal here is a number. And that's literally chess notation. It's that simple. Now, there's a little bit more to it with notation for using different letters to represent which piece moved to a different spot. But you don't need to know chess notation to play the game of chess. It will help in certain situations, like if you're reading a book that uses it. But you can begin playing chess now. If you watch this entire video, you should know all of the rules. But also keep in mind, when you play online chess, notice that we have circles on the spots where the piece can move. That's extremely valuable. And if you're playing on an actual board, you don't have that benefit. But when you're playing on a computer program or online on some website like lightchess.org, then it will show you where the piece can move. So you don't have to remember all of the movement rules right away. You can literally click on random pieces and then move them based on the highlight circles that it shows you where they can move. So for that reason, I say chess is extremely easy to learn. Chess is so easy to learn. Now you may think, well, Chastity, I know the movement rules of chess now. Now I know how to move the pieces. But how do I improve at the game? How do I improve at the game of chess? Well, one of the best ways is to play against other people or a computer opponent. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to play a game against the computer. Before I end the stream, I'm going to play a game against the computer, and we'll just see what happens, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to desktop mode. So you're going to be seeing my entire screen here. So this is OBS Studio, the program that I use to make my Twitch streams. And it shows I've been going for 38.5 minutes on this stream so far. That's a good idea of how much time I've spent. So now, let me close this window, and now you see the analysis board. This is what I've been using to show you all the movement rules of chess. So now, first of all, join livechess.org. Ooh, I have a notification here. Oh, hi. Someone said, sorry, I messaged the wrong person. Hello, anyway. Okay, that's funny. Yeah, so livechess.org is a site where you can play chess. It's also a social network. There you have like clubs and teams. There's chess tournaments. There's teaching tools like the analysis board. What I was on. That's that. You go here to the analysis board, and there you can also, if you want to learn about opening, you go here. There's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of great things on this site. So if you go to play, go to play, and then look at this option here, play with the computer. Go to play with the computer. Now, for some odd reason, it's showing this. What you want to do is you want to make sure this box here says standard, because you want to learn standard chess. And here is the strength level of the computer opponent. Now, if this is set to 8, then you're probably not going to have a chance at winning. If you're a new chess player, go to 1, because it has a chess engine called Fairy Stockfish that you can play against. Now, keep in mind, the player who plays white starts the game. And I recommend if you're a new player to start playing as white. After you've practiced that, try playing as black, and you'll see it's different just because you move second. But other than that, everything is the same. So let's have an example here of playing white. I'm playing against the computer opponent here. I'm playing against Stockfish level 1. Will I win or will the computer win? Well, let's find out. Let's try and just see what happens here. So there is, I moved my queen's pawn, and look at this. They moved their knight out. Well, what I want to do is I want to attack the knight, because that's how I play. That's my play style. Oh, now look at that. Isn't that interesting? So now the knight moved out of the way. Well, I'm going to move this pawn 2 spaces forward. Interesting. Now they're attacking my bishop with that pawn. That's kind of dangerous. Okay, well, I'm going to move this bishop right back here. Then the computer decided to move this pawn 1 space forward. It's a little unusual. So then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this pawn here, because then it will defend this bishop and this other pawn. Okay, I've never seen an opening like this. I've never seen this. This is unusual. Black is up to something, but I don't know what yet. This is kind of funny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my bishop out right here. Then what? Okay, then black moved the queen out. Okay, that's all right. I see what's happening. The queen wants to go there. And I can put a stop to that. I can put a stop to that by moving this pawn forward. I'm going to defend that spot. because I'm a relatively experienced chess player, so I kind of can see what the computer is thinking, what they're trying to do to me. And this is level 1. This is the lowest level here. Okay, so here we go. We have the knight retreated and moved back to where it was at before. So now there's that. Okay, they moved that pawn, and I can capture that pawn if I want to, but instead I'm going to take down that knight. I capture the knight. Okay, that's interesting. I expected them to capture my bishop with the pawn, but they didn't do that. Instead, the queen here just put me in check. Now my king has to either move out of the way, which it can move to one of these 3 squares, or I could put something in the path. Let's move this pawn here and block the check. So that blocks the check on the diagonal. The queen was attacking the king. Okay, I see how this is. They are attacking my bishop, but what I can do is I can attack their queen, and we'll see what happens after that. Now the queen had to retreat. That's quite all right. So now what is happening? This is a very, very unusual game that we got going on here. I think I will bring my bishop to safety, relative safety here. And then black. Oh, that was actually a good move by black. See what they did there is that they attacked my queen, and my queen can't capture it because it's defended by this pawn. So my queen has to move somewhere. That's totally fine. All right. Let's start getting some things out of the way here. I'm going to capture this pawn. See, level 1 Stockfish does not play very smart because I'm probably going to win this game because I'm playing against the lowest level computer opponent. But that's actually good because this means that you, as a new chess player, have a chance at beating Stockfish level 1. It's the weakest level. So the idea is the computer makes mistakes often enough that you might actually have a chance at winning. So that's kind of the idea. Okay, that's very interesting there. Let's capture this bishop. That pawn can capture my bishop. I capture that with the pawn there. Okay. This is most fascinating. Okay, gonna capture this pawn. All right, how fabulous is this? So now my bishop is going to put this king in check. And then, what will I do next? That's the thing, is it's hard to know. I'm going to move my knight right here. Okay, that rook captured my bishop, but now I have the chance to capture it back with my pawn right here. So that's what I'm going to do. This has actually gone on longer than I thought it would, but it's not all bad. It's really not. So let's start getting my knight into the action right here. Okay, the king decided to move there. Now my queen is going to put that king in check. Okay, and now you see my queen can come over here and take this rook. And now the queen jumped in the way, trying to save the trying to save the king there. So now I'm can trade queens if I want to, but instead I think I will come right here and put the king in check. And then, this is where it gets interesting. I can come here and put the king in check again, and the king has to escape somehow. So now, what we have going on here is my queen can come and take this pawn. And every time you put your opponent in check, their king has to escape the check, either by putting a piece in the way or by moving the king. And in this case, the bishop could not take my knight, even if it wanted to, because that would put the king in check, because my queen is still right here. So now is a good opportunity for me to castle. I'm going to castle my king here. Part of that is it allows my king to be safe in the corner there and moves the rook right here. So now it looks like I'm winning. It looks like I'm winning because Stockfish level 1 is not very strong. So let's bring this rook right here. Let's do that. Let's bring that rook right there. And now the queen retreated. Okay, that's absolutely fine. And now I'm going to take that bishop. Okay, my rook still survived. I wasn't expecting it to live that long, to be honest. Then I'm going to attack the queen with my knight. Remember the L shape. Now the knight takes the queen. My opponent is without pieces. Like, my opponent has hardly any pieces left. So now this is going to be so much fun. I am going to I'm going to be moving my queen over here to the corner. Now, I want to show you this. This is actually going to be checkmate. Look at this. The knight moves out of the way. And when the knight moves here, it's checkmate. And that's because the queen was already here. And so it was in line with the king. That's called a discovered check. But the reason it's checkmate is because this rook is still here. And the king can't move to either of these two spaces. And the king has no pieces left. So I just checkmated level 1 Stockfish on livechess.org. So here's the thing. In one stream, in one Twitch stream, or just a video, wherever you're happening to see this, I covered everything. I explained all of the rules of chess. And I played an example game against level 1 Stockfish.